Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to CSLDallas and our Science of Mind class. I'm Dr. Petra. And we have new art with our beautiful Linda Matthews, who does the art with us. She does the art gallery. She's the one who's always finding us new artists. And so she's getting to display because unfortunately the artist for this month was not able to. So we get to see a whole bunch more of Linda's amazing, amazing art. Which is always super cool. Huge thank you to Tracy for hopping in last minute for the class last week, and for Reverend Karen for doing the talk. As you can hear, I'm still a little froggy, but I'm much better. I had laryngitis, like serious laryngitis for 6 or 7 days. I think my body was just saying, you will sit down. You'll sit down now. And so I really tried to listen. So thank you for everyone who was able to help. So we're on page 109, and the topic is freedom or bondage. And I think this is one of the many, many difficult topics that we have in the science of mind to really think about and work with the idea of suffering, pain and suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there a mess in the world? Why haven't we figured all of this out? Well, the problem is we haven't figured it all out because we are free. Fundamentally, that is the problem, right? We are free. There's nothing preordained about how our lives should unfold. That is how free we are. Other than we will unfold, shall we say biologically, we will mature the same way that a flower or a tree or an animal does. But we have a whole host more choices that we can apply to that freedom. And I'm going to go to the very back of this section. This is on the page 110, at the very end of this section. Eventually, we shall understand that all human bondage is an invention of ignorance. So he says a lot of other things in the middle, and we're going to go back to them. But this is like the denouement of the argument about freedom and bondage. And it's about ignorance. Now, this does not mean we're stupid. It means that we don't know. What don't we know? Fundamentally, we don't know who we are. We believe that we're isolated, separate human beings, that we have to scratch and fight our way in like our biology tells us to do, right? Because our biology comes from evolution and where all the animals are finding their way. Although, surprisingly enough, there's massive evidence in our new science that even biology is much, much, much more cooperative than it is competitive. They have demonstrated that the big matriarch trees will, at some point in the middle of the forest, when there's whatever information they gather from their neighbor trees, right? All the roots are connected through the mycelium. And all of that, they're talking to each other constantly. And at some point, the matriarch tree commits suicide so that all the babies can grow up because they need the light, right? And we think of it as competition, competition, competition for the light. There's so many ways the crows and the wolves cooperate. There are lookout animals that tell other animals that there's a predator coming. And just because a predator chases down, a lion chases down a gazelle, this does not mean that it's a competitive, dog-eat-dog world. This means one animal has the function or the place of predator, and the other one has the place of prey. But it's extraordinary. Without the predators, the herds are less healthy, right? The predators can only catch the ones, generally, that are either younger or, quite frankly, sick or too old. And so they keep the herds healthy. And without the predators, there's lots of evidence that the rabbits go crazy or the rats go crazy. And so here's a completely wild fact, since we've just finished the divine feminine, completely wild fact. They have now discovered, I feel like maybe I've said this recently, but I can't remember where, whether it was in this class or not. They've now discovered that the Black Plague that decimated a third to a half of the European people in Europe was the product of the witch hunts. How come? Because in the witch hunts, one of the problems was that the women were herbalists, they were wise women, they were bringing out a lot of wisdom and natural wisdom, as opposed to always looking to a God out there. And because they were herbalists, because they were taking care of people, they understood cleanliness and how important it was. So why is every witch shown with a broom and a cat? Because they had them. They had brooms to help keep their places clean, and they had cats because they understood how important it was to keep down the vermin. So as the witch hunts went on, they also hunted cats, which is the whole thing about a black cat being a problem, right? They hunted the cats. Well, what happened when they hunted and killed the cats? The rat population. And where does the Black Death come from? From the fleas that were on the rats. And as the rat population exploded, those fleas exploded and caused the Black Death, right? So everything is actually in balance, in harmony, and we're ignorant of it. We're ignorant of who we are. We're ignorant of the fact that not only do we have this biological imperative, but we are actually spiritual beings housed in a biological expression called human being. And we are ignorant of the fact that we're constantly using the laws, that we are, well, let me rephrase that. We are ignorant that the laws are actually constantly acting upon us. It's really a much better way of saying it. Because gravity, we don't necessarily use gravity per se. I don't get up in the morning and say, okay, gravity, are you there? Okay, I'm coming. Hold me to the floor, right? We don't use it. Actually, gravity is acting upon the physicalities of our bodies. Well, the law of cause and effect, the universal principles, are acting upon life all the time. And it's acting upon our expectations, our viewpoint, our worldview, our cultural understanding, as well as our personal set of beliefs, all of that, right? Eventually, we shall understand that all human bondage is an invention of ignorance. And by bondage, we don't just mean being enslaved, although we can think of a lot of things that we are enslaved to, not just people who are being enslaved, but being enslaved to a way a culture sees others, to be enslaved to the idea that money is the end of all being, to be enslaved to the idea that if we don't have a partner or we're not madly in love with something, there's something wrong with us, right? We're enslaved to all kinds of false ideas. And it is this that keeps us in bondage. And so it's the bondage of our inability or our ignorance of the fact that we're free, that we can choose differently. We can individually choose differently, and we can collectively choose differently, right? All the climate issues that we're having have been for the last 50 years. Some people choosing differently, thinking about, wait, we need to do this differently, and others not, right? Racism, all the isms that we've been working with over the last 100 years, all the ways that we have elevated people into equity and equality, is people choosing something different than what had been the norm of the way to see things, right? And no longer being bound by what they were taught culturally, right? But freely saying, wait, no, that can't be true. if we have a loving God, if we have a loving presence, if the intention of spirit is self-expression, nobody can be left out, right? We are free. We're free to think that thought. We're free to act upon that thought. We're free to work together to change that thought in the cultural milieu. Do you see? And we're bound by our ignorance, which is the ignorance of this ability to make these changes. Our ignorance of false beliefs. It'll always be this way. It'll never be any different. It's really not happening. I don't know how to do it. What can I do? Right? All of these things come from our false understanding of what's going on. Not what's going on in the human realm, but of what's going on in the causal realm, right? Over and over and over and over again. Our spirituality and our science of mind points us to, we must understand the nature of reality in its totality. And so there are so many great things that are in here. The last thing I want to say, this is the middle of the second full paragraph. We recognize that we experience pain. Of course there's pain. There's pain in war. There's pain in what's happening in Israel and Gaza. There's pain in what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. There's pain in what's happening in the US with racism and poverty. There's pain when we're sick. There's all of that. We recognize that we experience pain, but how could there be an eternal reality to pain? If this were true, we would have a suffering universe, a suffering God, an agonizing deity, all of which seems untrue, unreal, and impossible. If we recognize that infinite reality, what we call God, is in fact the author, the creator of life, of the ever unfolding evolution of expression. So we must know definitely, consistently, that the universe is for us and not against us. But someone will say, the universe is not for us. Look at the evil, the limitation, lack, and physical pain and anguish of the human race. We shall have to learn that evil, all of this horribleness, is neither person, place, nor thing of itself, but an experience which we are allowed to have because of our divine individuality, until through negative experiences we learn to use the law affirmatively, to cooperate with it, and I would say with each other, and thus to enjoy the full benefits of the full benefits for the true law is a law of liberty, not of bondage. Science of mind is ultimately a liberation theology. It should liberate us from our belief that any of the things that we suffer from are somehow the nature of reality, God ordained. Well, this is just the way it is. Those people, whoever those people are, that today's Pride, here in Dallas, Pride Month, right? Those LGBT, those our trans family, those people, right? No, we have an ignorance about all of that. And we have to be able to choose. We have to find our way collectively, as much as we have to find our way individually to this liberty. There's no freedom or happiness as a spontaneous individual unless there can be temporary restrictions, of bondage and unhappiness through the wrong use of freedom. Right? And the wrong use of freedom is to, I'm passion around it, so I'm pushing a little too hard on my voice. The wrong use of freedom is to believe something that's counter to truth.
I guess that's my cue to
Excuse me.
welcome everybody into an engaging conversation about what we're talking about here today. So good morning to you, Dr. Petra, and good morning to everybody joining us here on campus. And I do want to encourage all of those who are online to join us as well. And so I'm going to say a couple of housekeeping rules for those who are in person here with us. Feel free to raise your hand, and those I'm waving to.
I'm going to let you
will
talk, and
be
I'm
on
going to ask
camera.
for a coffee.
And we're going to go right over to a nice pan shot of Linda's
Carmen,
artwork while I'm going
in my
through some
blue,
of this.
in my blue bag,
And
there's
for
a little
those
bag
who
of
are
cough
online
drops.
joining
Can
us
you grab
all
it for
over the
me?
world, we want to welcome you in community with us today. And you can participate as well. For the folks who are joining us via Zoom, you can always hit the raise your hand icon located down below, and we will have you enter into the room. And for those who are joining us on Facebook Live, you can put your questions and comments inside of the chat, as well as the folks in Zoom too. And I always like to mention that I keep those anonymous so we can continue to have a safe container for spiritual growth. So does anybody here on campus have thoughts, experience, questions? Anybody online? We'd love to hear from you. Yes, and shout out to our volunteer Patrick, and also the iconic Richard over here, who's been panning and zooming away.
I know, right? Well, I can certainly keep expounding, but I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts about it, or how have you come to grips with this within yourself? Did you have something you wanted to say?
Chime in, spare Peter's voice.
I know, right? I'm getting a cough drop, so don't worry.
Yes, Petra's getting over some laryngitis.
Yes, and I still have a little bit of whatever that junk is, it just wraps around my vocal cords, and it takes a while for it to get expelled. Get out, get out, get out. Okay, well, if you ever find yourself frustrated with what the heck is going on in the world, and all you see wherever you look is suffering, 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 read this section. Read this section. It is not God ordained for us to suffer. We do it. We do it to ourselves, and we do it to each other because we are ignorant of our oneness. We are ignorant of the truth of our essential self, which means, of course, we can't see it in someone else. And we are ignorant that the law can't fix it. And I don't mean human law. The law, the infinite law, can't fix it unless it gets new causal input. And we've been seeing that. We've been seeing that over the last 100 years. Actually, truthfully, we've been seeing it since the beginning of the Reformation in the West. I can't speak for the East. Not as familiar with the Southern Hemisphere. Mostly, I'm familiar with what's considered Western civilization, which is primarily North America, European. And we can see massive shifts in the last 300-400 years, beginning with the Reformation and the awakening of people to the fact that kingship isn't God ordained, that just because somebody is a priest doesn't mean that they have a better connection to the divine than we ourselves do, right? And all of this new understanding with science, with evolution, all the way into psychology, a recognition that we are the authors of our own lives. Now, science of mind and New Thought has been very committed to personal freedom, personal awakening, because it comes out of a worldview of group indoctrination. So in the church and in the state, for the 1,000 years of the Pax Romana in the Western civilization, power and authority was held by a small group of people, whether they were religious or secular, often in bed together. And everybody else really had no rights and had no way of furthering their own life. And so what happened, of course, is that people followed in the footsteps of their parents. They did whatever their parents did, or they did whatever they saw being done. And there was no ability to rise out of that for virtually 1,000 years. And in the last 500-600 years, we have begun to see that change. And that's the advent of this individualism, which we have brought to a peak in the United States. Ultimate individualism. Just, look at what we did with the pandemic. Ultimate individualism. You can't make me do something. I don't care if it's for the greater good. And because that's the pendulum, right? That's the pendulum swinging. So now the pendulum has been, for the last 400 or 500 years, swinging back to wait. And we see lots of evidence of the reintegration of recognizing how groups of us, right? We're all in this together, and that our individual and group actions actually impact others. So we had to free ourselves from that bondage as a people, as humanity, at least in the cultural milieu that I'm talking about, that I'm familiar with. We've had to slowly but surely free ourselves from that bondage. And as we do that, we begin to see those groups of people or areas or situations that are not yet free of that bondage, right? And the planet and the animals and plants and the planet itself that is still in bondage to our belief in our own dominion of it. And each time we look, right, it's more evident. It's more in stark relief because individuals have been raised out of bondage. Now we can collectively begin that deeper work of the next pendulum swing back to the we. New thought and science of mind is beginning to recognize that I, by myself, can only impact so much. I can only impact certain things in my life. I am, of course, impacted by other cultural things, and I have to do a lot of spiritual work if I don't want to be impacted by it. I can do that, but that's a lot of mental and spiritual coin. If we could get the whole thing out of bondage, we don't have to waste our mental and spiritual coin on that. We can actually use our mental and spiritual coin on creating, on discovering, on expanding and expressing ourselves. Do you see? And then we're more free to be more of who we are, which actually is an individualized expression of the one, which is unique and precious and lovely to explore that expression, to explore the kind of life I want to create, to explore how do I give my gift in a way that actually is good for my life, but also has a positive impact and is a part of all of life, continually learning about itself, all of us recognizing who we are, right? And so when we look at suffering and we look at these bad things that happen to people, right? What I hear in Science of Mind is I say, well, Spirit, I must be learning a lesson. The universe is teaching me a lesson. Okay, so let me just tell you that's just a rewrite of it's God's will. No, the universe isn't teaching us a lesson. The law is providing us with feedback. And do we like the feedback or not? Is this what we were trying to get to? Is this what we wanted to experience? Or is this just, wow, we didn't realize that it was going to play out this way. I have to see this differently, do this differently, right? So we are invited to learn because it's part of our growing process. It's part of our coming out of ignorance. So our choices and the consequences of our choices are educating us. But there's nothing out there saying, oh, I'm going to teach you this lesson and you that lesson and you need that lesson and I think you need that lesson. Remember all that conversation we had about the law. It's completely automatic, and all it does is say yes. Yes, to whatever the amalgamation of beliefs are that we're using to approach our life as a totality or certain areas of our life, which also means the amalgamation of the collective beliefs. So when we see bad things happening to good people, right, we have to recognize that there is an what shall we say? There is an unconscious outpicturing of something, and it could be an individual thought, but often it's actually the acceptance of, what shall we say? It's not even a formed belief. Nobody believes, oh, I'm going to have something horrible happen to me. Really, nobody wants that. Nobody chooses that. But we have an acceptance. Sometimes I can't even go with choice or belief. We have an acceptance that women get cancer. We have an acceptance that people of color are always under the gun of poverty, and we have an acceptance that homeless people deserve it. We have an acceptance that there's always going to be power struggles, and do you see what I'm saying? It's that acceptance that says, well, this is just the way the world works. Do you see? That is an embedded belief way, way, way back here somewhere. We have an acceptance that trans people are wrong. It's not okay to be LGBT. We have an acceptance in our, right? Do you see? And it doesn't even have to necessarily be a belief. It's stunning to me how many gay people are actually homophobic because of the culture, because it's an acceptance in the field of consciousness. We're doing our leadership lab, again, facing racism here at CSLDallas, and we had a woman who said, wow, I'm a black person and I notice that I have an issue sometimes with black men on the streets, and I'm, right? Not because we have this ubiquitous acceptance. We have an acceptance that, well, ultimately our deepest acceptance is, well, you know, I'm just human. This is just how it is. But we're coming then from our biology and our human condition, not from the spiritual truth. And there was one other statement he said, oh man, it's really good too. And let me just find it. You have to read this paragraph, this whole thing. There's one, I can't quickly find it. Do you see, we're allowed to have these experiences so we wake up to the fact that we continually accept the limitation of being human, as opposed to accepting the freedom of being spiritual beings. Do you see? That's the ultimate ignorance. And in accepting our humanness, what we're accepting is that our past defines our future. That's what we're accepting. It's always been this way. ... Fill in the blank. Therefore, it will always be that way, right? Even if we don't say those words, it's always been this way. It's just so hard to break the patterns. That's a recognition, or that's a place of coming from our human ignorance. It's only as hard as we make it, right? We can set a new cause in motion. It takes diligence, takes discipline, takes spiritual practice. Of course, nobody said it was going to be easy, but it is absolutely available to us. So that's another thing that causes suffering, that our past defines our future. That's a thing that we're ignorant about, that we can set new causes in motion. And that's why the suffragettes, the Pride, the original Pride movements, all the Black Lives Matter, all the way back to civil rights, all of these things, the Equal Rights Amendment, which is stunning to me that still isn't passed. All of that is our unwillingness to continue to accept that the past defines the future. Do you see? Even the change in green energy, right? It's either, no, this is how we've always done it. We've always made our money this way. There's no reason to change, which is the ignorance that is not seeing what kind of an impact that's having, to our freedom, our amazing innovations and creations and abilities and creativities. I know you've heard me say this before. My most uplifting email that I get is not a spiritual inspirational email. The most uplifting email I get once a week, is called Fix the News. It's also a website, and you can sign up for their email. And Fix the News used to be called Future Crunch. And just the most recent one, last week, I think it comes out on Wednesdays, I can't remember now. Last week, they always do, what's going on politically, and then health-wise, and then women, and then they do this whole thing on technology and what's happening with the climate. And the climate stuff is always based around green energy. And just last week, or this week, the tipping points have been reached. Tipping points have been reached in Europe. Tipping points have been reached in India and in China. Tipping points of more green energy is being utilized than fossil fuels or coal. More the price of batteries and the what should we say, I can't think of the word, the goodness of the batteries, instead of its, the badness of it, that they're lithium and that they can't be recycled and that they don't last long enough and blah, 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 all the problems with it. The tipping point has been reached. The new batteries that are coming out are amazing, and the prices are plummeting. Solar power prices are plummeting, and there are now more people getting solar. And the statistics are astonishing. And so, and because people are free to make different choices, and they are making different choices, right? And that's the collective change in making different choices and seeing how that begins to stunningly impact that we are no longer bound by a certain way of driving the economy, that we're no longer bound by the fact that we keep expelling groups of people, right? Oh, this is one of the most interesting things, which was actually predicted in a book I read 10 years ago that Bert Hedden, thank you Bert, gave to me, and it was called The Next 100 Years, and it's by a geopolitical scientist. So politics based on geography. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It's called The Next 100 Years. Oh my God. And one of the things that he said was, don't worry about the border wall. Don't worry about that, all of that, because by the year 2030, first world countries will be paying people to immigrate. Why? Because we need that influx, because all first world countries are in a negative population growth. And this is why you don't have enough nurses, you don't have enough home health care people, you don't have enough people in retail, you don't have enough waitresses, right? Because that is where immigrants tend to fill in that rung of society. It doesn't matter what country they immigrate to, because they have to learn the language, they have to find their feet. It's their children that then move in to, unless you're good, unless you come from India with an IT, or from Pakistan, or from Africa, or wherever you come from with an IT, or you come with a doctor, right? But the bulk of people, and we have become so protectionist in so many places so the big article about what's happening in the UK in 2025, the lack of immigrants is so impacting their economy. And we're going to start seeing that here and in other places, right? It's really astonishing because we are ignorant of how we are all part of the ecosystem of humanity, right? I learned so much from ecology and the way that ecosystems are constantly changing, they're constantly moving, and they're constantly working together, whether it's the mushrooms or the lion, or the apex predator, and everything in between. And when an ecosystem is in balance, it flourishes. Do you know when an ecosystem is in balance, there's no mosquitoes? Or let's say there's no mosquito problems because they're being eaten. It's extraordinary, right? I had that experience a few years ago up in Orcas Island. I had a yurt. I was in a yurt right next to a big pond, and I thought, I'm never going to be able to sit outside because here in Dallas, everybody overwaters. So we have massive, massive mosquito problems, and we've killed all the bugs, and we're killing all the birds. So huge mosquito problems. And I went and I looked out there and I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to sit outside. Because there was these nice little chairs looking over the pond. And well, I said to the lady, I was doing a natural horsemanship program for a couple days as a private student. It was great. And I said, well, I'm not going to be able to sit out there. And she said, no. She said, we have swallows and bats. I said, is it enough? She said, you sit out there this evening and you try it. I was stunned. Because it was all in balance, right? I sat out there, I enjoyed it, watched the sunset, and then I went into my yurt, put in my fire, because it got really cool. This is, right? And so we are ignorant of how the universal laws are always seeking to bring us into this beautiful equilibrium, this beautiful flow, this beautiful cooperation, this beautiful movement. Yes, actually, the universe is for us. Why? Because life is always for life. Even when the volcanoes spout, right? The most fertile soil, all soil started from volcanic ash. Over and over and over again. Even when it floods, all fertile soil comes from those floods. The problem is we're in the wrong places. We've built in the wrong places, for one. And for two, we have now impacted the weather. So the flooding is monumental. The tornadoes are monumental. And so out of our ignorance, we have contributed to that. Do you see? Not because we are bad people. Certainly not because the devil made us do it. Right? But because we were ignorant of the consequences. And we didn't pay attention as the consequences started to appear, or there was concern about that. But now we are. And I have complete faith in our ability as creative beings to move through all of this. But it requires us to become less ignorant. And again, it is the ignorance of the fact that we are ignorant when we believe that the past defines the future. We are ignorant if we believe suffering is God ordained. We are expressing our ignorance when we say this is terrible and nothing is ever going to change. Because what we are ignorant of is the causal reality. Do you see? That's our freedom. That's where our freedom lives, individually and collectively. Clearly, I can talk about this for a long time. So I hope this is inspiring to you. It is designed to remind us that we can liberate ourselves individually and collectively. And yes, sometimes it's freaking hard work. It's discipline. We've got to do it when we don't feel like doing it. Don't wait until you feel like it. If you wait until you feel like it, you'll never do it, right? If you wait until you feel like going to the gym or eating right? All those things, yeah, not so much. It starts with discipline, determination, dogged commitment, over and over and over again, dragging our consciousness to the spiritual truth. over and over and over again. And being committed to working with that freedom that we have. Yeah, radical freedom. We are so radically free, it's ridiculous. Because if we were not, we would be a tree or a dog or a porpoise or a bat or, right? We would be confined to only what our biology allows and only what however much the brain has developed. That we would be confined to that, and that would be that. But we're not. We're not, because we are waking up to who we are. And that's the thing that liberates us. That's what is the phrase? Know the truth, and the truth will set you free. All right. So you haven't raised your hand, so I'm assuming there are no comments. I've either put everybody to sleep. So I just really love it. I'm so grateful that you guys are all out with us all over the world online. I do want to remind you that we have a wonderful session this afternoon for those of you who really love CSL Dallas and want to know what's going on. We have a lovely, amazing session with Dr. David Zellman and myself. We're going to be sharing what we're doing with our building, how we're moving forward. We are going to talk about how we stand on our past in service to creating our future, honoring the past, but in service to creating our future as opposed to confining us to our past. And we're really going to have an opportunity to understand what we're doing, ask questions, make comments, and we really invite you to come on board, because I really believe that by the end of this year, CSL Dallas will be unleashed, and we will be unleashed into CSL Dallas 3.0, and we want you to be a part of it. So we want you to get on board with your consciousness as well, because we need all of us to set this new cause in motion. We need all of us to be seeing this new that we are creating together. So please, please do join us. You can register. Ryan may have put the registration in the link. You can register. It's hybrid, so it's both in person and online. We really want you to join us. Love to have you in person if you're here in DFW. That's always great, so that it'll be easier for me to see you, but we'll figure it all out. We'll be actually right here in this room. We're going to expand these seats, and we're going to be right here in this room to have the meeting, to have the session. So we will see you either at the celebration or at the session or at Karen's workshop next week. We got all kinds of fabulous things coming up, or my workshop at the end of the month. So check it out, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.